wraps it up then for Power Automate. So we're going to move on now and have a look at Power BI and really just give you a bit of an intro in terms of how we can use this particular tool. So we'll cover off some theoretical concepts first and discuss those, and then probably when we return after our final break for today, we'll go through a bit of an end-to-end demonstration and show you how you can build out a Power BI solution, create a report and a simple dashboard, that can help display some data that we've got within the organization. So for the first lesson then, what we really just want to try and do here is just describe the business value of Power BI and also look and see how it sort of works from a user perspective. And the main reason why we want to consider using Power BI in the first place is because these days organizations and the business world is increasingly data driven. Businesses of all sizes are going to be using data to be able to drive decisions about what's happening in their organization. Everything about whether or not we need to increase our sales team, whether we need to hire more people, whether we're meeting goals or not. Basically any area that a person may be involved in, they'll need to be consuming and viewing data in some shape or format to be able to make the right decisions for the future. So potentially that we've got an abundance of data, but that can start to become very challenging for us to consume this in a very easy way. And it can even be quite intimidating as well. If you're asked to go off and build a report, we're having to bring in data from maybe 6 or 7 different systems. All of that could start to mount up to a hell of a lot of work behind the scenes. And particularly if we've not got a formal background or formal training when it comes to building out these different data analytics or statistics solutions, then it's going to have, potentially we're going to be stuck at the first hurdle. And even if maybe we do get to a point where we've got a control over our data, it may start to become challenging in terms of ensuring that we can display our data in the most correct and most interesting way. Because really we want people to be engaging with our reporting solutions. We don't want them to be switched off and sort of going to sleep, when they look at our particular reports. So really the main value that Power BI can bring into the equation is by simply just taking the intimidation and also the hassle out of doing all this work. It becomes incredibly easy for us to go in, connect to our different data sources. We can do this using a very easy to use and also most crucially as well secure interface. And all of the data from our different business systems can be brought in very quickly and easily. So what we get then effectively with Power BI is a collection of different software services, apps and connectors that all work together to turn our unrelated sources of data into coherent, visually immersive and interactive insights. So regardless of whether our data is in maybe a simple Microsoft Excel workbook, whether it's in a collection of cloud-based or on-premise hybrid data warehouses, Power BI allows us to easily connect to our data sources, clean and model our data without affecting the underlying source, and we can then start to visualize or indeed discover what's important and then share this with anyone or everyone we want in the organization. So whether we're wanting to maybe have a report that's just for us, for just our particular area, or if we're looking to maybe build out a set of reporting tools or a suite that the entire organization can use, whilst also having all of the capabilities, all of the enterprise management and governance features that we'd expect, Power BI can very quickly and easily meet both ends of the spectrum and can be incredibly versatile in that regard. So for the purposes of the PL-900 exam and for when we're just getting started with Power BI for the first time, these are some of the core concepts that we need to get our head around. So first of all, we need to have an awareness of capacities. And this is something that relates to how we consume content on the online Power BI service, and will typically represent the resources that are available in order to consume our content. As an organization, depending on what licenses we purchase for Power BI, we'll either be consuming Power BI using sort of a shared capacity, which is being used by multiple different Microsoft customers, or we could be consuming dedicated capacity, where we've maybe purchased a set number of maybe compute, maybe CPUs and RAM and all that sort of stuff from Microsoft, and that is just for us being consumed by us, and therefore has some sort of guarantee in terms of it's always going to be available. We're not going to see any performance issues or problems like that. Now, as you expect, the dedicated option does cost quite a bit more, anything up to at the moment, I think at minimum of $3,000 per month, depending on what we are wanting in terms of capacity. So typically, most organizations will go for the shared option. $3,000 may sound like a lot, but potentially for quite large deployments, it may work out being more cost effective to go down that route as opposed to buying a per user subscription like Power BI Professional or Premium per user. Next, we've got the concept of workspaces, and all workspaces must be tied to a capacity of some shape or format. So in most cases, it'll be a shared capacity, or it could be that we could assign it to a dedicated or indeed a premium capacity as well. And workspaces act as our sort of area where we can put all of our different sort of content. So similar to a solution, a workspace will act as our container to be able to store things, all the other things that we can see on the slide here. By default, every user of Power BI, regardless of whether they have a license or not, will have their own personal workspace that you can access, which has got a set amount of storage and which you can use to basically publish out your own personal dashboards and personal reports. The idea is that you were not able to share that content to other users. You would need some form of paid subscription to be able to do that. Assuming we've got a paid subscription, we can then set up one or as many different workspaces as we want, and these will then act as our sort of main collaboration hubs for our different data. And we can add different colleagues into these workspaces, push out all of our reports and all our content, and this will allow us then to work with all of that. But at a minimum, in order to do that, we need to make sure that we've got some form of paid license. So at a minimum, we would need a Power BI Professional license to be able to do that. We can also use workspaces to basically publish out our content as an app, and an app is effectively just a finished product. It's basically a report and maybe a set of dashboards that have been built out and are ready for wider consumption in the organization. These apps can then be pushed out to any user in the organization. People can navigate through onto Appsource and find all of the apps that have been made available in the organization, then install them in there and start to consume the content that's available. From there, we start to move into the elements that fit inside the workspace. So data sets will be the various different data that we bring into Power BI that we typically would maybe import or connect to. As we'll see, Power BI can connect to a variety of different data sources. Shared data sets will be ones that maybe people in the organization have built out and have published for more general consumption. So maybe our business intelligence team has created an optimized and wholly accurate version of maybe our customer data. We can then use and consume that freely amongst our different reports and dashboards. And we've got some sort of assurance there that what we are connecting to is pretty tip top from a quality standpoint. Reports is what we would use to collect together different pages of visualizations. And more often than not, we would use an application known as Power BI Desktop to be able to build these out. And we'll return to that in a short while in terms of what that is and how we can work with that particular application. And then finally, we'll have our dashboards. And the main difference that dashboards and reports have is that a dashboard is always a single page, a single canvas of content, and can most crucially contain a variety of different visualizations known as referred to as tiles from a dashboard standpoint from many different reports, either in one workspace or maybe indeed other workspaces as well. So we really would use dashboards, as a way of being able to bring together multiple different content into a single view. Dashboards also have support for things like streaming data sets and the ability to have images and videos embedded as well. So it's important that from a terminology standpoint, we don't get too confused. You may sometimes hear people refer to as a report as a dashboard. What I would say is don't fall into that trap, because you could end up getting yourself into a bit of a muddle. And just keep in mind the key differences between a report and a dashboard. Reports can have multiple pages. A dashboard is only one page. Reports can have can only have visuals from a single report in there, whereas dashboards can bring together content from multiple reports. Familiarize yourself with the differences between them. That this sort of stuff is ripe territory from an exam question standpoint. So to help us get started, we can actually go in and check out a series of different sort of template apps that are available in the Power BI portal. These can be apps that have been made available from organizations such as Microsoft. They could be from other third-party providers. And really, they're all around just designed to just get us going with Power BI as quickly as possible. All we do is we just install the app, provide some connection details to the service we want to connect to, and then from there, that app can then be consumed and used by us as we see fit. So before we jump into our final break for today, let's just take a quick look at how we can install an app using the Power BI portal. So I'm just going to navigate to app.powerbi.com. So again, we get a similar sort of welcome page over here for all of the various different content that may exist in this environment. Then what I can do is I can click on apps on the left hand side over here, and then click on the Get Apps button to open up Appsource. So we can see we've got a range of different apps over here. So not just from Microsoft, but also things like maybe GitHub. We've got GitHub and LinkedIn are technically Microsoft. So other products, maybe Salesforce as an example, Dynamics 365 apps, different third-party companies, lots for us to choose from here. And if we're interested in maybe just consuming one of these apps, we can just click onto them like so. So maybe we can just see how the good old USA is doing with COVID at the moment. Just need to click the Get It Now button. Just supply some details like so. Not going to be too fussed in terms of what I supply here. Test.domain.com. Let's just put in just random details. Continue like so. Then after a few moments, the app will be installed into my particular environment. I just need to make sure that I've accepted all the terms of services and things like that. Okay, so the app has been installed. I can click onto there. At the moment, it's just showing some sample data, but in the background, it's refreshing it all. So you can just see here in terms of how the USA is getting on. Can maybe click onto different visuals on the page. We can see that the entire report updates based on what I'm selecting. So if I'm interested maybe in how multiple states are doing, I can just hold down my control key to select them like so. Get a bit more of a view, maybe across different date ranges. This particular report has some external links to documentation that we can click on that takes us out of Power BI. That's another quite nice thing that we can do with these apps. And really, we can just explore this and just sort of see what everything that this report will tell us can do. And it just gives us a nice little indication in terms of, okay, well, this is the type of thing that we could potentially build out if we're using the tool as well. So we can use these just maybe for a bit of inspiration, maybe as a way of being able to quickly get going with a particular Power BI solution. So as an example, if we're using Dynamics 365 Sales, we've got some Power BI apps for those that we can just install, connect up to our environments, and then suddenly, yes, we're using Power BI to suit our particular requirements. So definitely do check out what's on offer on here. It can sometimes be quite useful tools to look at. So any questions on that then before we move on? Right, so in which case then it's time for our final break for today. So 15 minutes just to get for a quick comfort break and get recaffeinated and all that good stuff. So I'll see you back here shortly and we'll continue looking at Power BI. All right, welcome back everyone. So, as we saw before the break, template apps act as a really great mechanism we can use to get started with Power BI very quickly. So even if we don't necessarily have an applicable data source or an app that matches up to our data source, we can maybe quickly just check out one of the sample apps on there. For example, the US COVID tracker. See what that's all about and just get a bit of a flavor in terms of what we could potentially do with Power BI if we were to build our own solution. So do review these and do check these out. They will potentially be of use to you in your journey with Power BI. Well, traditionally, the most common way in which we would look to work with Power BI would be by bringing in our own data. And we've got good support across a variety of different sort of data sources available. So similar to Power Apps and similar to our Power Automate, we've got connectors available for both Microsoft and non-Microsoft services. It is technically a separate list of connectors though, so it's not going to be a straight one-for-one between what we saw earlier and what we've got here. But generally, you'll have pretty good coverage amongst most different application systems and software providers. And you've also got options to be able to connect to, or conceivably any data source via HTTP, REST APIs, or even using things like ODBC drivers and stuff like that. So again, I'm pretty confident in saying that Power BI can connect to any kind of data source, and there's going to be there'll be easier routes than others, of course, but it's still going to do the job for most scenarios. From there, we then look to start building out our report, and the principal tool we'd use to help us with this is the Power BI desktop application, which is what we're going to be returning to in a short while as part of our demo for this module. And it's worth just spending some time just to be clear in terms of, okay, what are the three core tools that we would use when it comes to Power BI? Understanding of this will be pretty essential for the exam. So we start off in most cases by using the Power BI desktop application to not only bring our data into our potential report, but also to be able to build out our report itself. This application is a Windows-only app that we can download from the Microsoft Store or from the Microsoft website, and it can't be used on any other operating systems such as Linux or Mac OS. So traditionally, we would start off our journey with Power BI Desktop, and I'd say that most people from a Power BI standpoint will spend probably about 70% of their time in the desktop app when they're building out reports. Once we're happy we've got something that is ready to consume or maybe to be viewed by others, we can then look to push this out to the online service. And this is where we then go into that app.powerbi that we saw just before the break to be able to go in and view the content we pushed out. And it's also the main destination where we go to create and build out our various dashboards. We wouldn't use the Power BI desktop application to do that. Dashboards are online only component. So again, keep that one in mind. That's another good ripe territory for a potential exam question. Finally, and this is a purely optional step, we can also look to consume our Power BI content on the go via the mobile application. So again, similar to what we saw before, this is available on all the major app stores. So again, and we can build out and configure specific views of our dashboard data within these apps to best cater for different device types, different sizes, and various things like that. So as we mentioned, Power BI Desktop will be our prime destination when it comes to building out reports, and we principally work within the following areas we can see on the slide here. The ribbon will contain all of the various different actions and common tasks that we would typically do when we're building out our reports. On the report view or canvas pane is where we would look to add on our various different elements. So things like, we can add on our visuals, we can add on tables and various other components. At the bottom, we can add on as many different pages as we want for a particular report. And then on the right-hand side, we can see we've got panes to be able to choose and add on different visualizations, and also as well the different tables and columns that we may want to include as part of our different visualizations. Both of these component types can be very quickly and easily dragged onto the main canvas view and then render themselves accordingly. So we've got lots of choice when it comes to visualization types. So the list on the left hand side covers off the ones that are available by default in Power BI. So everything from area charts through to matrices, pie charts, and then finally waterfall charts. A lot of potential choice here that we can use and leverage. For more challenging scenarios, or maybe where we just can't find a visual that fits our particular usage case, we can look to go out into Appsource. And then from there, we'll find a mixture of different custom visuals that may have been created by Microsoft or in most cases by other companies, other Microsoft partners or independent software vendors. These can be added into our reports. Some of these may also have may require some form of maybe payment or purchasing a license. And it's also worth noting that some of these visualization types will be certified with Power BI Online, and these will be clearly indicated by a blue tick next to the name of the visual. What this means is that the visual will be optimized and will work with most capabilities in the online service, whereas uncertified visuals won't. So where possible, if you want to have that consistent experience akin to the type of experience we get with these visuals over here, then look out for that blue check mark to make sure that it's present. Finally, what we can look to do as well is we can maybe engage a developer and they can go in and build out visuals using Python, using R, or also TypeScript as well. But there's typically a bit more work involved as part of that. As we bring data into Power BI for the first time, I want to potentially look at filtering our data in a few different sort of ways. So it's important that we know how we go about doing this. Filtering is a concept that applies only to reports. It's not something that we consider always applicable to our dashboards. And it's worth just pointing out that when we're filtering data, such as maybe a visual on a bar chart, we're just changing our specific view of the data. We're not in any way modifying the source of the data. So there are primarily five different ways in which we can apply filters on a report. We can set up one or several different slicers that we can add onto our page, and this will allow us to filter and provide a prompt to users to filter based on things like date ranges and various other elements. If you recall, during the break, we saw on that COVID report that there was a ability to sort of select from a range of dates. So that is using a slicer on the report to achieve that. Moving away from that, we can then also configure filters at the report level. Excuse me, at the page level, on a per visual basis, and we could also configure drill through as well. Excuse me. Drill through is quite useful if we're wanting to maybe go a little bit deeper. Maybe we want to go into a specific page that shows some detailed information about the information points we're interested in. And can be something that we can take advantage of. A bit more of an advanced concept, and one which is covered in depth as part of the DA-100 course, if you're interested. When we bring data into Power BI Desktop, our first destination, as we'll see in a few moments, will be the Power Query Editor, and we use this as our primary mechanism to be able to edit and work with our data and apply different sort of transformations. We can launch this from any time within the Power BI Desktop application, and over time, as we work with Power BI more and more, it's a natural expectation that we'll need to have good grasp of how to work with Power Query and be able to use this to get our data into the shape it needs to be. This is because, primarily, whenever we're working with data, it's typically not going to be in the best possible shape when we receive it the first time. So there'll be a lot of different things that we need to do just to get it looking really nice and sparkly clean for our reports. So we can do a variety of things in the Power Query Editor. We can do things such as transposing data, we can format data, we can remove columns, maybe filter out data, find and replace data. Lots of different options here that can help us. When we get into actually build out our report ourselves, we want to start thinking about some of the ways in which we can create different aggregate types. So, typically from a report level, we're interested in things such as the sum, the average, the min, the max, counts, various different aggregate type data like that. We can look to add these onto our reports in a few different sort of ways. As we'll see in a demo shortly, we can also use DAX formulas to be able to build out more complicated aggregate types. And these can then be included as part of different measures on our reports to report our data, report and display our data in many different sort of ways. Now, I mentioned earlier that Power BI's benefit is that it works for both small and enterprise-based deployments. And this is demonstrated by the fact that we've got a rich array of different sort of security and administration options in the platform. So this is primarily because the primary benefit of using Power BI is that it is built on Microsoft Azure, and it uses Azure Active Directory as the primary means of being able to sign in and access our content. This ensures that we can not only provide self-service business intelligence to our users, but also ensures that our administrators are the ultimate guardian when it comes to the data, processes, and policies across our Power BI deployment. And typically an administrator would need to go into the admin portal sometimes to maybe enable or disable certain features. And we can do things such as configure governance policies, we can monitor our usage, provision licenses and capacities, and do other tasks as well. So another customer case study here for somebody who's using Power BI quite sort of extensively. So this is a company called Miami Heat, who's using Power BI across whatever 70% of the organization. This company leverages the powerful analysis and visualization features within Power BI to completely transform their customer interactions and also business operations. So this Power BI is always a very popular tool, and also very easy to sort of sell on in terms of the benefits. And also still a lot of momentum as well. A lot of people migrating away from solutions such as maybe Tableau or IBM Cognos. Power BI is much more attractive because it can cater to some of those things that I spoke about in the previous slide, whereas these other tools sometimes can be a little bit more lacking. All right, then let's look at an end-to-end scenario then involving Power BI, where we're going to build out a report and then publish that out into the service and then create a dashboard for it. So to start off with, we need to make sure that we're in the Power BI desktop application. So as we mentioned, this is something that we can download from the Microsoft website onto our Windows machine. And what we want to do is we want to work with one of the sample data sets that Microsoft make available to us just to build out a very simple report. So we're going to click on the Try a Sample Dataset button over here. And then we're going to select the Load Sample Data option. This is going to bring in data from a financial spreadsheet. And we're just going to do some basic modifications and transformation to this data to get it looking how it needs to be before we build out our report. So most sources we connect to will look like this. We'll have the name of the source or the document in this case. Then we can see all the different workbooks and all the different tables that are in this spreadsheet document. So the one that we're interested in is our financials, and we get a nice little preview like this. Then for me to go in and start shaping this data, I'm going to click on the Transform Data button at the bottom like so. And this will open up the Power Query Editor window where I can start to do some transformation to this particular sort of data source. So we can get a feel for all the different things we can do in Power Query just by navigating across the ribbon. And we can see we've got lots of different options on here, both in terms of transformations, in terms of adding on additional columns, and various other options as well. So the first thing I want to do is just sort out some issues with the unit sold column. We can see that in some cases it's returning a decimal quantity. Now typically we don't, most people don't sell sort of products in sort of decimal quantities. It's usually just as a whole unit. So let's just convert this into a whole number. I can do this by clicking on the 1.2 icon there and then selecting whole number from the list of the peers. And I just want to replace the current step that's in there, and then we can see that converts that out into a whole number. Next, I want to format the segment column because I want to ensure that it appears in sort of uppercase, so it's a bit more noticeable on the report. So again, I can select the column up here like so. Go to Transform, click on Format, and then select uppercase to do that. Notice as we are applying these changes to this underlying data source, this list here of applied steps grows all the time. So everything we do in Power BI will be is done step by step, and we can very easily sort of return to a previous state of our query just by clicking on a previous step, and we can see it reverts the change that we just did. So this gives us the ability of being able to see the evolution of what we've done to the data, as well as return us to a previous last known good state if we ever encounter an error or a problem in our particular report. Other transformations I can do is maybe renaming some columns. So maybe I just want to have this as month instead of month name. I want to maybe filter out some products that we're not interested in. So maybe just get rid of the Montana products. So this is quite similar to Excel in terms of how we can filter data out. And with that, then my query is ready to go, and I can load this into my model to start developing the report further. So I can do this by navigating to the Home tab and clicking on Close and Apply at the top. After a few moments, this should load into my model for me. Okay, so I can see there's my data over there, fully loaded. I've got all the columns and fields down here. If I click on the table or the data view over here, I can again see this how it all looks like so. I can also view how this how my queries look in terms of the relationships between the objects by clicking on here by clicking on the model button down here. But as at the moment there's only a single table in here, this isn't really particularly useful a view, but we will return to this in a short while. Now for our report to work as we want it to, we want to add on some an aggregate that's going to report back and tell us the total units sold for a particular, for our products that we've sold across the financial period. So to do this, I can create a new measure by clicking this button at the top up here. And this is where I can use this language that I mentioned earlier, DAX, to be able to write out these formulas. So in this case, I want to give this formula a name, total units sold. And as we'd expect, it's used as fairly common type sort of Excel-like syntax here. So I can do a sum based on my units sold, and I can see I get a full list there of everything, every single column that I can select from. Hit the return, and then we can see I've got a new measure added to my financials table that shows me the total units sold. I can also use DAX to create new tables as well. So because I want to add the slicer to the report, I need to create a date dimension that can be used as part of the different filters that we're going to apply on. Now, typically, if we're connecting to a data warehouse or similar, it might be that a date dimension already exists that we can use. But if that's not present, then what we can instead do is create a brand new table using the DAX formula. So I'm going to call this my calendar table. And rather conveniently, we have a nice handy function called calendar that we can use that will generate me a list of dates based on a range that I specify. So I want to get a list of dates starting from the 1st of January 2013 until the end of December 2014. So we can see we get the full 730 rows, and we get a row for every single day between those different periods. For this to now be usable with my slicer, I'm going to navigate onto this view down here, and I can what I can do in Power BI is I can create relationships between my different objects, and that will then ensure that things like filters apply correctly. I can create a relationship very straightforwardly by just dragging the date column from the financials table onto the top of the date column over here. We can see that a many-to-one relationship is then created, and then my slicer should then work as expected when we move on to the next step. So with my data all modeled out in Power Query with a couple of DAX formulas set up and relationships defined, I'm now at the point where I can start building out my report. And typically this is a common common way in which we would need to work in Power BI. We need to do all this really important fundamental stuff first before we start adding on visuals and starting to build things out. Because if we've got bad data, if our data is wrong, then guess what, our report's going to be pretty crummy as well. So it's really important that we go through all of these steps each time. Let's start by adding on a title to the report. So I can add on a text box by selecting it from the top. I'm just going to call this my executive summary finance report, like so. I'm going to increase the font size to 20 and then put it in bold. And then let's just adjust this so it's got a little bit more space on here, like so. Now I can start adding in some different visuals. So I'm going to start off by just dragging the profit column onto the canvas. And we can see that straight away it creates me a very simple bar chart image, bar chart visual, I should say, based on what we've done there. I can then start to extend this out a bit further by maybe adding on the date column from my calendar table, like so. We see we then get a breakdown of our profit across different years because we added that in. Dates will automatically be added on as a hierarchy that we can, which we can see here. So the purpose of this visual, I'm just going to change that to just date, like so. And we can see we now get this sort of broken down by sort of month. And the only final changes we want to make to this is we want this to be a line chart instead. We can see then if we sort of spread this out a little bit here, like so, we get a nice view of our data across the different months. And we can see our best month has been December 2014. With that done, I can then drag this up here, and this is now ready to go for my report. Next, I want to add in a map visual that's going to show me my profit based on the country I'm in. So I'm just going to drag in the country column like so. Because it's recognized that this is a geographic column, it's chosen a map visual automatically for me, but it's not really showing anything useful at the moment. We've just got one bubble for each country where we've got sales. Let's extend this further by dragging the profit onto the map as well. We can see now the bubbles are now larger based on the total number of profit for each region. And we can see based on this that Europe is doing a lot better compared to North America. With that visual ready to go, we can then just drag it. We can just drag it up here, maybe like so. Maybe we just want to move this and scrunch this up a little bit so we get a bit more room. Now we're going to create a visual that's going to show us our sales broken down by product and segment. So on the fields pane, I can select multiple fields to get them added onto the visual, onto the canvas, I should say. So I'm going to tick sales, I'm going to tick product, and I'm going to tick segment. And based on that, it's been able to choose a clustered column chart. It's recognized that's going to be the most optimal visualization type for the information I'm showing. When we spread this out, we get a nice view of our data across the different sort of products and segments. So next we want to add on a slicer so that our users can filter based on months and years. So I'm just going to click on the slicer button like so. And then I'm going to select the date column over here to populate the slicer. So by default, it populates and creates itself as a sort of a slider like this. I want to just change this so it's displaying as a list instead. I'm going to then just extend this out down here like so. Then what I want to do is I want to navigate down here. I want to enable the hierarchy for this slicer like so. And then I'm not too concerned about the quarter or the day columns. So what I'm just going to have it as is I can filter it based on a year or a specific months in a year like so. And this filter can then be sort of, I can have it so I can just select individual months like so. Or if I hold down the control key, I can maybe just select all months and all years like so. So this report is pretty much ready to go. Other things we can do as well is we can actually apply on different themes to our reports. So maybe I just want to add on a new executive theme for this. And with that ready to go, I can then think about pushing this out onto my Power BI service. So I'm going to save this down onto my local desktop. I'll just call this my financial summary report. I need to ensure that I've got an appropriate workspace set up on my online service. So I'm just going to go in and just set that up now very quickly. So I'll just a PL-900 Bootcamp Workspace. Now, if I return to Power BI Desktop and hit the Publish icon, I can see there's my new workspace that I created. After a few moments, this content should be pushed out onto the online service. I can click the button here to open it up. And I can see here's my report. I can interact with it fully in the same way as I would for my if I was working with this via the desktop application. And what I can now start thinking about is maybe setting up a dashboard for this. And I do this just by hovering over any visual on here, selecting the pin icon. Then we can see I get an option to be able to create or add it onto an existing dashboard. So I'll just create a brand new dashboard for this, finance dashboard. Click on pin. I can do the same for the other visuals on the page as well. So just pin all these on like so. Then when I'm ready, I can navigate through to the dashboard. Here's all the visuals I've added on. I can maybe just move these around to sort of suit how I want it to be. So maybe I want this one to have a lot of space down here. Maybe I just want this to be a little bit longer, like so. I can also potentially work with features such as maybe the Q&A. So this is quite nice in terms of it lets us ask a question against our data. So for example, I can maybe do something like, okay, show me the top products by total units sold. I get a nice little visual generated for me on the fly. I can also then look to pin that onto my dashboard. And again, maybe just adjust that so it's got a bit more space at the bottom. And then from there, this would be my go-to destination every day. I could sort of work with this dashboard. I could maybe extend it out further, add on additional visuals as and when needed. And I've got myself a nice solution ready to go that can report on my critical business data. So that wraps it up for my sort of end-to-end sort of demonstration of Power BI. Before we move on, does anyone have any questions at all? No? Okay. So just to recap on some concepts then before we move on to our final module for today. So we're just going to talk about some of these in a bit more detail and we'll focus on some of the final steps that we saw as part of the demo a few seconds ago. So as we saw, we can connect Power BI up to a variety of different sort of data sources. And in the example that we saw, we connected up to an Excel workbook and pulled in some important financial data. If we wanted to, we could connect to other sources, so things like Dataverse, SQL Server, SharePoint, various different Azure services, a lot of different choice there depending on our individual needs. We got a bit of a feeling in terms of how we could go about and transform our data. So we saw some ways in which we can maybe format data, we can maybe rename columns. Other things we can do as well is maybe create new columns on the fly. We can remove any columns that we don't need, and we can really sort of just fine tune the queries that we build out in Power Query to suit our particular scenario. Our next step would then be to start thinking about adding on the various different visualizations that we need. And there's a few different ways in which we can do this. We saw how we can drag fields onto the Canvas page, and also how we can then add on visuals using the visualizations pane. With our report ready to go, we can then push this out into the online service, and this will be the point where we then create the dashboard. Dashboards are an online only feature. They're not something we can create with or work with within the Power BI desktop application. And the most common way in which we would create our dashboard for the first time is by pinning on visuals that we're interested in, and just keep doing that until we've got all of the content on our particular dashboard ready to go. Finally, and the main idea behind us pushing out content to a shared workspace is that we'd look to maybe get this content shared out to other users. We can do this in a few different ways. We could just ensure that our colleagues are added into the same workspace with the relevant permissions that we push the content out into, and they'll be able to access that. Alternatively, we can share specific content on a case-by-case basis, simply just by selecting the share icon over it and then sharing it out to the user or to the group that we want. So a really flexible way in which we can go about and sort of share out content. But the main thing to remember with this is that we must have a paid version of Power BI or be consuming some form of paid dedicated capacity within our workspaces. If we are a free user and we don't have any of this available to us, then we will not have the ability to share our content. It's one of those things that we do have to start paying for. Okay, and that wraps it up for our look at Power BI then. So any questions before we move on to our final topic for today?